I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon in March to find my mailbox hanging open, and that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. My name is Samuel Irving, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona, for about 8 months. It was one of those planned communities where every house looked vaguely similar, painted in approved earth tones, with landscaping that followed strict guidelines laid out in a document thicker than most novels. When I bought the place, I thought the rules would be annoying but manageable. I had no idea what I was actually getting myself into. The mailbox door was bent slightly, like someone had forced it open without a key. I stood there on the sidewalk, briefcase in hand, staring at the damaged metal. My mail was scattered inside in a disorganized mess, and I immediately noticed that several envelopes were missing. I had been expecting checks from 2 different clients, payments for freelance graphic design work I had completed. One was for $3,000, the other for $1,500. Both should have arrived that day based on the tracking information the clients had sent me. I pulled out what remained of my mail and headed inside, my stomach churning with unease. Once I was in my living room, I laid everything out on the coffee table and tried to figure out what was gone. The checks were definitely missing. So was a letter from my bank and what looked like it might have been a credit card statement. Everything else, the junk mail and advertisements, was still there. My first thought was to call the police, but then I remembered something my neighbor Tom had mentioned a few weeks back. He lived 3 houses down and had warned me about the HOA president, a woman named Patricia Greenwood. Tom said she was obsessed with collecting HOA dues and had started getting aggressive about it when people were even a few days late. I was actually 2 months behind on my dues, not because I couldn't pay, but because I had been traveling for work and it had completely slipped my mind. I grabbed my phone and called Tom. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hey Samuel, what's up? My mailbox was broken into today. Checks are missing. Did anything like this ever happen to you?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Actually, yeah, about 3 months ago." I never could prove anything, but I had a check from my mom go missing right around the time Patricia was hounding me for late dues. "You think she's stealing mail?" "I think she's capable of it," Tom said carefully. "She came to my door once and straight up told me she knew I had money coming in and that I needed to pay my dues immediately." "How would she know that unless she was looking at my mail?" I thanked Tom and hung up, my mind racing. If Patricia Greenwood was actually opening people's mail to look for checks, that was a federal crime. Mail tampering was serious business, and I knew the U.S. Postal Service had investigators specifically for this kind of thing. I decided to set up my phone in the window facing the mailbox and start recording. If she came back, I would catch her in the act. But first, I needed to report what had already happened. The next morning, I called the United States Postal Inspection Service. A woman with a professional, clipped voice answered and listened to my story. She took down all my information and told me that an inspector would contact me within 48 hours. In the meantime, she advised me to check with my local post office and file a report there as well. I drove to the post office on Hayden Road and spoke with the manager, a patient man named Greg, who looked genuinely concerned when I explained the situation. He pulled up the tracking information for my expected checks and confirmed they had been delivered to my address the previous day at 1:15 in the afternoon. I had still been at work at that time. "This is troubling," Greg said, adjusting his glasses. "We've had a couple other reports from your neighborhood in the past few months. Nothing we could pin down, but enough to make me wonder if something's going on. Other reports of mail theft, missing checks specifically, Always checks. Regular letters and packages seem fine, but anything that looks like it might contain money goes missing. I left the post office feeling validated but also deeply angry. This wasn't just about my money, although that was certainly important. This was about someone systematically violating federal law and thinking they could get away with it, because they had a little bit of power in a homeowners association. That evening, I got a call from a man who identified himself as Postal Inspector Marcus Chen. His voice was calm and authoritative, the kind of voice that immediately made you feel like you were talking to someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Mr. Irving, I've reviewed your complaint. I'd like to come by tomorrow and talk with you in person, if that works with your schedule." We arranged for him to come by at 10 in the morning. I took the day off work, telling my boss I had a personal emergency to deal with. It wasn't a lie. Inspector Chen arrived exactly on time, driving an unmarked sedan. He was in his early 40s, wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather portfolio. We sat in my living room and I walked him through everything that had happened. He took meticulous notes and asked detailed questions about the HOA, Patricia Greenwood, and any interactions I'd had with her. "Have you received any communications from the HOA about your overdue dues?" he asked. "I've gotten 3 letters," I said, standing up to retrieve them from my home office. I handed them to him and watched as he read through each one carefully. The letters had become progressively more aggressive in tone. The first was a polite reminder. The second threatened fines. The third, which had arrived just a week ago, stated that the HOA would pursue all available means of collection, and that they were aware of my financial situation and capability to pay. Inspector Chen's eyebrow raised slightly at that last phrase. Interesting wording. How would they be aware of your financial situation? They wouldn't, unless they were looking at my mail. He nodded slowly. "I'm going to need you to keep this conversation completely confidential. Don't tell anyone I was here. Don't mention to anyone that you filed a complaint with the Postal Inspection Service." "Can you do that?" "Absolutely." "Good. I'm going to open an investigation. In the meantime, I want you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Keep that recording device set up on your mailbox. If you see anything suspicious, document it, but don't confront anyone. Let me handle this." Over the next 2 weeks, nothing unusual happened. My mail arrived normally, though I had asked my clients to stop payment on the missing checks and send replacements via certified mail that required my signature. I paid my overdue HOA dues in person at the association's office, handing a check directly to the board-looking secretary who worked there. Patricia Greenwood wasn't present, which was probably for the best given how angry I felt. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I got a call from Inspector Chen. "Mr. Irving, we've made significant progress on your case. I need you to come down to the federal building downtown tomorrow at 2. Bring any documentation you have related to your HOA." The federal building in Phoenix was an imposing concrete structure on Washington Street. I went through security, was given a visitor badge, and was escorted to a conference room on the 4th floor. Inspector Chen was there, along with another postal inspector, a woman named Sarah Rodriguez, and an assistant U.S. attorney named David Park. They had evidence. A lot of it. Inspector Chen explained that after receiving my complaint, they had started surveilling the mailboxes in Meadowbrook Estates. They had also pulled records for other complaints in the area and found a pattern. Over the past 6 months, 11 residents had reported missing checks. All 11 were behind on their HOA dues at the time their mail went missing. All 11 had subsequently received aggressive collection letters from Patricia Greenwood. We installed a camera on the utility pole near your mailbox cluster, Inspector Chen said, sliding a folder across the table to me. This is what we caught 4 days ago. I opened the folder and found myself looking at a series of time-stamped photographs. They showed Patricia Greenwood, a heavy-set woman in her late 50s with short blonde hair and a permanent scowl, approaching the mailbox cluster at 1:30 in the afternoon. She was carrying what looked like a master key. The photos showed her opening my mailbox, along with 3 others, and removing envelopes from each. She then sat in her car, which was visible in the frame, and appeared to open some of the envelopes. We watched her do this on 3 separate occasions, Inspector Rodriguez said. She has a master key for the mailboxes, which she apparently obtained through her position as HOA president. She's using it to access residents' mail, specifically targeting people who owe dues. She opens envelopes looking for checks. What happens to the checks? I asked. David Park, the federal prosecutor, leaned forward. That's where it gets interesting. We executed a search warrant on her home yesterday. We found over 30 checks, totaling more than $40,000, hidden in her home office. Some were made out to businesses, some to individuals. She hadn't cashed any of them yet. Why not? We're still piecing that together, Park said. Our working theory is that she was holding them as leverage. When people owe HOA dues, she steals their incoming checks so they can't deposit that money. It puts pressure on them to prioritize paying the HOA. Once they pay up, she would either destroy the stolen checks or return them anonymously. We found evidence she had done this before with several checks that later turned up in the community center's lost and found box. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this. That's insane. It's also incredibly illegal, Park said. Mail tampering is a federal felony. Each instance carries up to 5 years in prison. We're documenting at least 47 separate incidents where she unlawfully opened mail. We also have her on theft charges at the state level. What happens now? She was arrested yesterday evening, Inspector Chen said. She's been charged with multiple counts of mail tampering under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 1703. She posted bail this morning, but she's looking at serious prison time if convicted. The case is solid. They needed me to testify about my missing checks and the damaged mailbox. I agreed immediately. This woman had violated not just my privacy, but the privacy of dozens of people in my neighborhood. She had used her position of minor authority to commit federal crimes, thinking she was above the law. The news spread through Meadowbrook Estates like wildfire. By the weekend, everyone knew that Patricia Greenwood had been arrested for mail tampering. The HOA held an emergency meeting to remove her from the board and elect an interim president. I didn't go to the meeting, but Tom did, and he called me afterward with all the details. You should have seen it, Samuel. Half the neighborhood showed up. People were furious. Turns out she's been doing shady stuff for years, not just the mail thing. She was approving violation fines against people she personally didn't like and waiving them for her friends. She was also skimming money from the HOA budget. How much? They're still auditing, but it looks like maybe $20,000 over the past 3 years. She was submitting fake invoices for landscaping work that never happened. The case moved forward with surprising speed. Patricia hired an expensive defense attorney who tried to argue that she had only been trying to help the HOA collect legitimate debts. The argument went nowhere. Opening someone else's mail is illegal, period. The intent doesn't matter. I was called to testify before a grand jury in May. The process was less intimidating than I expected. I simply told my story, answered questions from the prosecutor, and confirmed the timeline of events. The grand jury returned an indictment on all counts. The trial was scheduled for September, but it never happened. In late August, Patricia's attorney negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to 15 counts of mail tampering in exchange for the prosecution recommending a sentence at the lower end of the federal guidelines. The state charges for theft were rolled into the agreement. I was in the courtroom the day she was sentenced. It was a hot afternoon in October, and the federal courthouse was packed with residents from Meadowbrook Estates. We all wanted to see justice done. Patricia stood before the judge, wearing a conservative navy suit and looking significantly thinner than she had in the surveillance photos. Her attorney made an impassioned argument about her previously clean record, her mental health struggles, and her remorse for what she had done. Judge Catherine Wilson listened patiently, then delivered her ruling. "Miss Greenwood, you held a position of trust within your community. People relied on you to manage their homeowners association fairly and honestly. Instead, you systematically violated federal law for your own purposes. You invaded the privacy of your neighbors. You stole their property. You attempted to manipulate them by withholding their lawful mail. This court cannot treat such conduct lightly." Judge Wilson sentenced Patricia to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims and banned from ever serving on an HOA board again. I watched as Patricia was led out of the courtroom by U.S. Marshals. She didn't look at any of us. Her face was blank, resigned. Outside the courthouse, several of my neighbors gathered on the steps. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good, Samuel. If you hadn't reported this, she would still be doing it." A woman named Jennifer, who lived 2 streets over from me, joined our conversation. "I got my stolen checks back yesterday. The Postal Service returned everything they recovered. I never thought I'd see that money again." Inspector Chen appeared beside us, wearing sunglasses against the bright Arizona sun. "Mr. Irving, I wanted to thank you personally. Your willingness to come forward and cooperate made this case possible. A lot of people wouldn't have bothered." "She broke the law," I said simply. "Someone had to do something." "More people should think like that," Chen said. He handed me his card. "If you ever have any other issues, don't hesitate to reach out." The months following the sentencing were oddly peaceful. The HOA elected a new board, led by a retired accountant named Michael, who immediately implemented transparency measures and reformed the violation process. Dues were now handled by an independent management company, and board members had no access to residents' personal financial information. I settled into a comfortable routine in Meadowbrook Estates. My freelance business was doing well, and I was actually starting to enjoy the community now that the oppressive atmosphere Patricia had created was gone. I got to know my neighbors better. Tom and I started having regular barbecues on weekends. Jennifer organized a neighborhood watch program that actually focused on safety rather than nitpicking code violations. In January, about 4 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from Patricia Greenwood. It had been forwarded through her attorney, and the return address was a federal correctional institution in Dublin, California. I debated whether to open it. Finally, curiosity won out. The letter was handwritten on lined notebook paper. Patricia's handwriting was surprisingly neat, almost elegant. "Mr. Irving," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me, and I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I'm writing because I owe you an explanation, though I doubt it will make any sense to you. For years, I ran that HOA like it was my personal kingdom. I convinced myself that I was the only one who cared about maintaining standards, the only one willing to do what was necessary. When people didn't pay their dues on time, I took it as a personal insult. In my mind, they were disrespecting the community and, by extension, disrespecting me. I started looking at their mail to see if they actually had money problems or if they were just ignoring their obligations. Once I started, I couldn't stop. It became an obsession. I told myself I was helping the community, but really, I was just feeding my own need for control. I lost sight of basic decency and legality. I destroyed my own life over HOA dues. The irony isn't lost on me. I hope you've received your money back. I hope the community is better without me running it. I'm sure it is. Patricia Greenwood. I read the letter twice, then filed it away in my home office. I didn't respond. What would I say? Her explanation didn't change what she had done, didn't erase the violation of privacy or the stress she had caused, but it did make her seem more human, more pitiable. She had let a small amount of power corrupt her completely, and now she was paying the price. Life moved on. My business continued to grow. I hired an assistant, a recent college graduate named Amy who was enthusiastic and talented. I started dating a woman named Emma Barnes who worked as a veterinarian in Temp. We met at a coffee shop when I accidentally grabbed her order by mistake, and she teased me about it until I offered to buy her a replacement. 6 months later, we were talking about moving in together. Emma thought the story about Patricia and the mail tampering was simultaneously horrifying and darkly funny. "Only in an HOA," she said one evening as we sat on my back patio watching the sunset. "Only in an HOA would someone commit federal crimes over dues payments." She got 18 months in prison over it. "Good," Emma said firmly. She worked with animals all day and had a straightforward sense of justice. People need to learn there are consequences. You can't just do whatever you want because you have a little bit of authority. I couldn't argue with that. In March, almost exactly a year after my mailbox had been broken into, I got an email from Inspector Chen. Patricia Greenwood had been released early for good behavior and was now in a halfway house in Mesa. She was prohibited from entering Meadowbrook Estates as part of her supervised release conditions. He wanted me to be aware in case I saw her around the area. I thanked him for the heads up, but honestly didn't give it much thought. Patricia was no longer my problem. She was no longer anyone's problem in the neighborhood. Her power was gone, her reputation destroyed. Whatever happened to her next was her own journey to deal with. The HOA continued to function smoothly under Michael's leadership. Dues were collected efficiently and transparently. Violations were handled fairly and with actual communication rather than punitive fines. The neighborhood felt like an actual community now instead of a police state run by a petty tyrant. Tom sold his house in June and moved to Colorado for a new job. Before he left, we had one last barbecue at his place. About 20 neighbors showed up, including Jennifer, Michael, and several other people I had gotten to know over the past year. "You know what's funny?" Tom said as we stood by the grill. "I almost didn't warn you about Patricia that day you called. I almost just minded my own business and let you figure it out yourself. But I'm glad I didn't. You actually did something about her. You made this place better for everyone." "I just reported a crime," I said, feeling embarrassed by the praise. "Most people wouldn't have," Tom insisted. "Most people would have eaten the loss and moved on. You stood up to her, even though you didn't really know anyone here yet, and you could have just paid your dues and been left alone." He had a point. It would have been easier to just pay the dues and avoid conflict. But easier isn't always right. Patricia had been breaking the law, hurting people, and she needed to be stopped. Someone had to do it. Emma and I moved in together in August, renting out my house in Meadowbrook Estates to a young couple who were thrilled to find a place in such a well-managed community. The new HOA had actually become a selling point for the neighborhood rather than a deterrent. Property values had gone up. People wanted to live there. I still drove through Meadowbrook Estates occasionally when I was in the area. The mailbox where everything had started still stood at the end of my former street, repaired and functioning normally. Every time I saw it, I thought about that March afternoon when I came home to find it hanging open and my checks missing. That single violation had led to a federal investigation, an arrest, a prison sentence, and ultimately positive change for an entire community. In October, I was invited to speak at a community meeting in a different HOA across town in Gilbert. They had heard about what happened in Meadowbrook Estates and wanted to discuss how to prevent board members from abusing their authority. I initially declined, not wanting to relive the experience, but Emma convinced me to go. "You have a story that could help people," she said. "That's worth an hour of your time." The meeting was held in a community center similar to the one in Meadowbrook Estates. About 50 residents attended, along with their board members. I stood at a podium and told them what had happened. I explained how Patricia had used her position to commit federal crimes, how the patterns had emerged, how the investigation had unfolded. "The lesson here isn't just about mail tampering," I said as I wrapped up my talk. "It's about accountability. HOA board members have real power over people's lives and property. That power needs to be checked by transparency, oversight, and the willingness of residents to speak up when something isn't right. If you see something that seems wrong, don't assume someone else will handle it. Don't assume it's not your problem. Report it. Document it. Hold people accountable." The audience asked questions for another 30 minutes. How did I know to contact the Postal Inspection Service? What evidence did I need to gather? How long did the investigation take? I answered as thoroughly as I could, and I could see people taking notes, genuinely interested in protecting their own communities from similar abuse. On the drive home, Emma squeezed my hand. "You were great up there. Those people really needed to hear your story. I just hope it helps someone." "It will," she said confidently. 2 years after Patricia's arrest, I got an unexpected email from Michael, the current HOA president of Meadowbrook Estates. He wanted to let me know that the association had completed a full audit of Patricia's tenure and recovered an additional $35,000 that she had embezzled through various schemes. The money had been returned to the HOA's reserve fund. More importantly, they had implemented new bylaws requiring regular independent audits, term limits for board members, and a formal process for residents to appeal violations. "You started something important when you reported what happened to you," Michael wrote. "This community is fundamentally different now, and it's because you had the courage to stand up. Thank you." I forwarded the email to Inspector Chen with a short note thanking him for his work on the case. He replied within an hour. "Cases like yours are why I do this job," he wrote. "Most mail crimes are perpetrated by strangers, people stealing from mailboxes at random. When it's someone in a position of trust, someone who's supposed to be serving their community, it's particularly egregious. I'm glad we were able to hold her accountable. And I'm glad the community has recovered. Emma and I got married in November in a small ceremony in Sedona. Tom flew in from Colorado. Several of my former neighbors from Meadowbrook Estates attended, including Jennifer and Michael. It was a beautiful day, clear and cool, with red rocks glowing in the afternoon sun. At the reception, Michael gave a toast that surprised me. He talked about community, about trust, about the importance of doing the right thing even when it's difficult. He talked about how a single person's actions can create ripples that spread far beyond what they initially imagine. "Samuel reported a crime," Michael said, raising his glass. But what he really did was restore integrity to a community that had lost its way. He reminded us all that we have the power to demand better, to expect better, and to create the kind of neighborhoods we actually want to live in. To Samuel and Emma, everyone raised their glasses and drank. Emma leaned over and kissed my cheek. "You did good," she whispered. 3 years after the mail tampering incident, I was working from my home office when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was a spam call, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Irving, this is Patricia Greenwood." I sat up straighter in my chair, suddenly alert. "Miss Greenwood, I'm surprised to hear from you." "I'm sure you are." Her voice sounded older, more tired than I remembered from the courtroom. "I'm calling because I wanted to apologize to you directly. I wrote you a letter from prison, but I never knew if you received it or read it." "I read it." "Did you?" "Well, I meant every word. I've spent the past 3 years thinking about what I did, about how I let myself become that person. I'm in therapy now. Real therapy, not just the court-mandated stuff. I'm working on understanding why I needed control so desperately that I was willing to break federal law to get it. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness," Patricia continued. "I know I don't deserve that. I'm calling because you need to know that you were right to report me. You were right to testify. You were right to hold me accountable. If you hadn't, I would have kept going. I would have hurt more people. You stopped me from doing more damage, and I'm grateful for that, even though it cost me everything." "What are you doing now?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "I work at a grocery store," she said. "I stock shelves overnight. I live in a small apartment. I'm not allowed to serve on any HOA boards ever again, which is probably the best thing that ever happened to me and to every HOA in America. I'm rebuilding my life from scratch, and it's hard, but it's honest work. That's more than I can say for what I was doing before." We talked for a few more minutes. She told me she had paid all her restitution and was finishing up her supervised release. She was trying to reconnect with her daughter, who had cut off contact after the arrest. It was slow going, but there was hope. When we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about second chances and accountability and redemption. Patricia had done terrible things. She had violated people's privacy, stolen their property, and abused her position of trust. She had earned her punishment. But she was also trying to make amends, trying to become a better person. That had to count for something. I told Emma about the call that evening over dinner. "How do you feel about it?" she asked. "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me is still angry about what she did. But part of me respects that she's actually taking responsibility now instead of making excuses." "Both things can be true," Emma said. "You can be angry about what happened and still recognize that people can change. That's not weak, that's just realistic." She was right, of course. Life isn't simple. People aren't simply good or evil. Patricia had done evil things, but that didn't mean she couldn't work toward becoming better. My job wasn't to forgive her or condemn her. My job had been to report a crime and help bring her to justice. I had done that. What she did with her second chance was up to her. Years passed. Emma and I had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. We bought a house in Temp with no HOA. Just a regular neighborhood where people mowed their lawns or didn't, painted their houses whatever color they wanted, and generally lived their lives without someone breathing down their necks about minor violations. I never forgot about what happened in Meadowbrook Estates, though. How could I? It had taught me important lessons about power, accountability, and community. It had shown me that one person speaking up really could make a difference. I occasionally drove past the old neighborhood when I was in Scottsdale. It always looked nice, well-maintained, peaceful. The kind of place where families could thrive without fear of petty tyranny. That was Patricia Greenwood's legacy now, though probably not the one she would have chosen. Her crimes had led to reforms that made the community genuinely better. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't reported the mail tampering. Would Patricia have continued escalating? Would she have eventually gotten caught some other way, or would she have kept going for years, ruining more lives and stealing more money? There was no way to know, and it didn't really matter. What mattered was that, when I saw something wrong, I did something about it. That's a lesson I plan to teach my kids as they grew up. Doing the right thing isn't always easy. It's often uncomfortable and complicated, but it's necessary. Communities function because people care enough to maintain standards, to hold each other accountable, to speak up when something isn't right. On a sunny afternoon in April, about 5 years after everything had happened, I got a letter in the mail. The return address was from Flagstaff. Inside was a short note and a check for $500. Mr. Irving, the note read. This is partial payment toward a debt I can never fully repay. When I stole your checks, I stole more than money. I stole your sense of security in your own home. I violated your trust and your privacy. I've included $500 as a symbolic gesture. It's all I can afford right now, but I wanted you to know that I haven't forgotten what I did to you and to others. I'm working to make amends in whatever small ways I can. I hope you and your family are well. Patricia Greenwood. I showed the letter and check to Emma. She read it carefully, then looked at me. Are you going to cash it? I think so, I said. She's trying. That has to count for something. I deposited the check the next day and donated the money to a nonprofit that provided legal aid to people dealing with HOA disputes. It seemed like the right thing to do, a way to take something bad and turn it into something useful. The story of Patricia Greenwood and the Meadowbrook Estates HOA mail tampering case became something of a legend in HOA circles around Phoenix. I heard about it referenced at community meetings, used as a cautionary tale in board member training sessions, cited in local news articles about HOA reform. The case had been a watershed moment, proof that even small-scale corruption wouldn't be tolerated if someone was willing to stand up and report it. Inspector Chen retired from the Postal Inspection Service and occasionally gave talks about his career. He always mentioned the Greenwood case as one of his most satisfying investigations. It had everything, he told an audience at a law enforcement conference I attended. A clear pattern of criminal behavior, solid evidence, a cooperative victim, and a resolution that actually made the community safer. Those cases are rare. They're why I stayed in this job for 30 years. Michael served 2 terms as HOA president in Meadowbrook Estates before stepping down, having implemented all the reforms he had promised. The neighborhood thrived under the new structure. People actually wanted to serve on the board now because it wasn't about power trips. It was about genuine service to the community. I ran into Jennifer at a grocery store in Scottsdale when my kids were 7 and 5. We hadn't seen each other in years, but we recognized each other immediately and spent 20 minutes catching up in the produce section while my kids tried to convince me to buy cookies. The neighborhood is doing great, Jennifer told me. We just finished renovating the community center. Everyone actually gets along now. It's amazing what happens when you remove one toxic person from the equation. I'm glad it worked out. It worked out because of you, Jennifer said firmly. Don't downplay it. You did something brave and important. As my kids grew older and started asking questions about the world, I told them age-appropriate versions of the story. When my son was 10, he asked me why the HOA lady had stolen the mail. Because she thought she could, I said. She had a little bit of power and she let it go to her head. She forgot that rules apply to everyone, even people in charge. Did you get in trouble for telling on her? No. She got in trouble for breaking the law. That's how it's supposed to work. My daughter, who was 8, frowned thoughtfully. But what if nobody had told? Would she still be stealing mail? Maybe, I said. That's why it's important to speak up when you see something wrong. Bad people keep doing bad things when good people stay quiet. It was a simple lesson, but an important one. I wanted my kids to grow up knowing they had the power and the responsibility to stand up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable. Emma and I celebrated our 10th anniversary with a trip back to Sedona, staying at the same hotel where we had gotten married. On our last evening there, we sat on the balcony watching the sun set over the red rocks, and she brought up the old HOA case out of nowhere. "Do you ever regret reporting Patricia?" she asked. "I mean, it took up so much of your time and energy. You had to testify, deal with investigators, relive the whole thing over and over." "Never," I said without hesitation. "It was the right thing to do. If I hadn't reported it, who would have? How many more people would she have hurt? You're a good man, Samuel Irving." "I'm just a man who came home to a broken mailbox and decided to do something about it." But that was selling it short, and I knew it. Doing something about it had required courage, persistence, and a willingness to see the process through even when it would have been easier to just let it go. It had required faith in the system, faith that justice would actually be served if I did my part. Looking back on everything that had happened, from that first afternoon when I found my mailbox hanging open to the reforms that followed Patricia's conviction to her eventual attempt at making amends, I realized that the whole experience had shaped me in ways I hadn't fully appreciated at the time. It had taught me that individuals matter, that one person's actions can create meaningful change, that standing up to corruption and abuse of power is always worth the effort. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Emma leaned against my shoulder, and I put my arm around her. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "Not just for the HOA thing, but for the kind of person you are. The kind of person who sees something wrong and actually does something about it instead of just complaining." "I learned it from watching my dad," I said. "He always said that integrity means doing the right thing even when no one's watching, even when it costs you something." Your dad was a smart man. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over Sedona. Somewhere out there, Patricia Greenwood was living her quiet life of atonement, working her overnight shifts and trying to rebuild relationships she had destroyed. Somewhere out there, Inspector Chen was enjoying his retirement, satisfied with a career spent holding people accountable for crimes they thought they could commit with impunity. Somewhere out there, the residents of Meadowbrook Estates were living their lives in a community that functioned the way communities were supposed to function, with fairness and transparency and genuine concern for everyone's well-being. And I was here, with the woman I loved, having built a good life for myself and my family, secure in the knowledge that when it had mattered, when I had been tested, I had done the right thing. That was enough. That was more than enough. The story of the HOA president who opened people's mail looking for checks and ended up facing federal charges for mail tampering had become part of local lore, a reminder that no one was above the law, no matter how small their domain or how justified they felt in their actions. It was a story about consequences, about accountability, about the importance of speaking up. But more than that, it was a story about community, about how communities can be corrupted by people who care more about control than about service, about how communities can heal when that corruption is exposed and removed, about how communities thrive when they're built on trust, transparency, and mutual respect, rather than fear and intimidation. Years from now, when people told the story, they might get some of the details wrong. They might misremember exactly how much money Patricia had stolen or how long she had spent in prison. But the core truth would remain. Someone in a position of minor authority had abused that authority for petty reasons. A resident had noticed, reported it, and followed through despite the personal cost. Federal investigators had taken the case seriously and built a solid prosecution. The justice system had worked. The community had reformed and improved. It was a hopeful story, ultimately. A story that said systems can work when people engage with them honestly. A story that said communities can change for the better when residents care enough to hold their leaders accountable. A story that said your mail is protected by federal law, and even an HOA president in Scottsdale, Arizona can't violate that law without facing serious consequences. As Emma and I drove home to Temp the next day, I thought about all the little moments that had led to this point. The decision to call Tom instead of just ignoring the missing mail. The decision to contact the Postal Inspection Service instead of just eating the loss. The decision to cooperate fully with the investigation instead of trying to handle it privately. The decision to testify instead of backing out when things got complicated. Each decision had seemed small at the time, but together they had added up to something significant. They had added up to justice. They had added up to reform. They had added up to a better community for hundreds of families. That was worth the trouble. That was worth the time and energy and stress. My phone rang as we pulled into our driveway. It was an unknown number with a Phoenix area code. I answered cautiously. "Mr. Irving, this is Dana Murphy. I'm the president of the Sunset Ridge HOA in Chandler. I got your number from Michael at Meadowbrook Estates. I'm calling because we're having some issues with our board treasurer, and I think she might be doing something similar to what happened in your neighborhood. Would you be willing to talk to me about how you handled your situation?" I looked at Emma. She nodded, understanding immediately what I was being asked. "Yes," I told Dana Murphy. "I can talk to you about that. Let me give you the contact information for Postal Inspector Marcus Chen. He's retired now, but he can point you toward the right people in the Postal Inspection Service. And Dana, document everything. Take photos, keep records, make notes of dates and times. Evidence is everything." We talked for another 15 minutes. I walked her through the entire process, from discovering the tampered mailbox to the final sentencing. I gave her advice about what to watch for, what to report, how to protect herself and other residents while an investigation was ongoing. When I hung up, Emma was smiling at me. "What?" I asked. "You're still doing it," she said. "Still helping people stand up to bad HOAs. Just sharing information." "You're making a difference," she insisted. Again. Maybe I was. Maybe that was my role now, the guy who had been through it and could help others navigate similar situations. It wasn't a role I had asked for, but it was one I was apparently qualified for and willing to fulfill. The sun was setting as I stood in my driveway, looking at my house with no HOA rules to worry about. No petty tyrants watching my every move. No one opening my mail to see if I had money they could manipulate me with. It was a good life, a free life, a life I had helped protect not just for myself but for others. That Tuesday afternoon 5 years ago, when I came home to find my mailbox hanging open, I had no idea I was about to become part of a story that would matter to people I had never met, in neighborhoods I had never lived in, facing situations I couldn't have imagined. But that's how these things work. You don't choose to be tested. You don't choose when moments of moral clarity will arrive. You just choose how to respond when they do. I had chosen to respond with honesty, with persistence, with faith in the justice system. And it had worked. Patricia Greenwood had been held accountable. The Meadowbrook Estates community had been reformed and improved. Other communities were learning from what had happened and implementing their own protections against similar abuse. One broken mailbox, one missing check, one decision to report a crime instead of looking the other way. That was all it had taken to set everything in motion. That was all it had taken to make a real difference in the lives of real people. As I walked into my house, where Emma was already starting dinner and my kids were doing homework at the kitchen table, I felt genuinely satisfied with the choices I had made. Not proud exactly, not self-congratulatory, just satisfied. I had done what needed to be done, and good things had come from it. That was all anyone could ask for, really. To see something wrong, to do something about it, and to live with the knowledge that you had tried to make things better. The story was over, but its effects continued rippling outward, touching lives and changing communities in ways both large and small. And if Dana Murphy in Chandler was dealing with a corrupt treasurer, well, at least now she knew what to do about it. At least now she had a roadmap, a success story to follow, proof that standing up to HOA corruption wasn't futile. The evening passed peacefully. We ate dinner together, helped the kids with their homework, watched some television, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. It was ordinary and wonderful, the kind of life you could only fully appreciate when you understood how easily it could be disrupted by petty tyrants with small amounts of power. But those tyrants could be stopped. They could be held accountable. The system could work. Justice could be served. Communities could heal and reform and become better versions of themselves. I knew all of this because I had lived it, experienced it, seen it happen in real time. And now others would know it too, because I was willing to share my story, to help guide them through similar situations, to be proof that standing up to corruption was worth the effort. That was the real ending to the story of Patricia Greenwood and the mail tampering case. Not her arrest, not her sentencing, not even her eventual attempts at redemption. The real ending was the knowledge spreading through communities across Arizona, and beyond that HOA board members were not above the law, that residents had rights that couldn't be violated without consequences, that federal crimes were taken seriously no matter who committed them or why. That knowledge was power. That knowledge was protection. That knowledge was hope for everyone who had ever felt helpless in the face of an abusive HOA board. And it all started with one broken mailbox and one person who decided to do something about it instead of looking the other way. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything.